He said it in front of everyone. In the middle of a marble lobby, surrounded by his men, this powerful Korean mafia boss looked down at a 16-year-old black boy who had traveled across the city alone, carrying nothing but a letter from his dying mother. And he said it without blinking. "Too dark to be my heir." The boy didn't cry. He didn't run. He didn't know. He just looked up at the man who shared his bone structure, his jaw, his brow, and stared at him with a pair of eyes so cold, so still, so utterly without fear, that every man in that lobby looked away before the boy did. Because those eyes, they were identical. And Shin Chae-won, one of the most feared men in all of Seoul, a man with a black dragon tattooed up his neck, a man who had never once been made to flinch, felt something crack open inside his chest that he had spent 47 years keeping sealed shut. He told his men to destroy the photograph. He sent money the boy returned unopened. He built walls the boy simply walked around. And then, on a cold night in Incheon, when rivals took that same black boy and used him as leverage against his own father, Chae-won didn't send his men. He went alone. What happened in that warehouse, what was said between a father and a son in the dark, and what it cost both of them to walk back into the light together, that is a story about what happens when a man's greatest rejection becomes his only redemption. But what he found when he looked into that boy's eyes, he never imagined it would change everything. Before starting the story, comment here from where you are watching and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. There are men in this world who have never once questioned themselves, not out of wisdom, not out of peace, but because they learned very early on that doubt is a crack, and cracks are how empires fall. Shin Jae-won was one of those men. He sat at the head of a long obsidian table on the 42nd floor of a building that officially belonged to a private investment firm. Below him, Gangnam stretched into the night like a circuit board lit with cold gold. He had looked at this view 1,000 times. He never grew tired of it. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because every light down there was, in some way, connected to him. A restaurant that paid quietly, a politician who owed favors, a judge who had learned that certain verdicts were healthier than others. Shin Jae-won had spent 23 years building this, thread by thread, body by body. The dragon tattoo on his neck, black ink crawling from his collarbone up to his jaw, had been done when he was 24, the night he took control of the Hyuk-young from the man who had once broken 3 of his fingers for looking him in the eye. He had looked that man in the eye again at the end, and that man had been the one to flinch. He did not like to think about the past. The past was a room with no exits. What he liked was this: silence, control, and the slow rotation of a glass of whiskey between his fingers. The envelope arrived without announcement, slid across the table by a man named Beck, his most trusted operative, the kind of man who had learned to read the room before entering it. Beck placed it carefully, the way you place something fragile near something dangerous. "It arrived this afternoon," Beck said. "From the hospital. Severance. She asked a nurse to deliver it." Jae-won did not touch the envelope immediately. He looked at it, then at Beck. "She is still alive?" It was not a question. "Yes, but the diagnosis is serious. They say 6 months, maybe more if the treatment responds." Jae-won turned back to the window. 6 months. Imani Osei. A name he had not spoken aloud in 16 years. Had 6 months. He remembered her the way you remember a dream you tried to forget. the steadiness of her hands, the way she looked at him across a table full of dangerous men and seemed impossibly unafraid. She had been the only woman he had ever met who made him feel slightly off balance. He had hated that. He had also, for a period of exactly 2 years, been completely incapable of staying away. Then she had left. Or he had made it impossible for her to stay. He was no longer entirely sure which. He had not known about the child. Or rather, he had told himself he did not know. There is a difference, and it is the kind of difference that keeps certain men comfortable for years. Beck cleared his throat. There is also a photograph inside. Chaewon opened the envelope. A boy, 16 years old by the look of him. Pale dark skin, the warm copper black of his mother, but the bone structure underneath, the jaw, the brow, the exact width of the space between the eyes. That was not Imani's. That belonged to a man who had spent decades making sure no one looked at him too long. And the eyes, dark, still, utterly without expression, in the way of someone who has taught themselves to feel nothing in photographs because they have learned that showing feeling costs something. Chaewon set the photo down. He was quiet for a very long time. Destroy it, he said. Beck hesitated. Barely, the way a man hesitates when he believes his superior is making a mistake, but values his own survival. Then he nodded and left. The photograph was destroyed. The envelope was burned. Chaewon finished his whiskey and went home to an apartment so immaculately designed, it looked like no one lived in it. Because, in every way that mattered, no one did. He believed that was the end of it. He was wrong. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning that smelled of rain and diesel, a boy appeared at the entrance of the Hykyung's official building, the investment firm, the respectable face of everything Chaewon had built. He came alone. He wore a dark gray hoodie, black cargo pants, battered sneakers, a single backpack on his shoulders. He had no weapon. He had no escort. He walked up to the security desk with the unhurried certainty of someone who had decided, before leaving the house, that fear was not something he was going to carry today. He said one name: Shin Chaewon. The guards looked at each other, then they called upstairs. Chaewon was told there was a boy at the entrance claiming to be his son. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Send him away." The boy did not leave. He sat down in the lobby and waited. An hour passed. The boy read something on his phone. He did not fidget. He did not pace. He simply sat, with the patience of someone who had learned that the world does not move quickly toward people like him, and who had decided that was fine. He would simply wait it out. Chaewon came down himself. He would not have been able to explain why. He told himself it was to manage the situation, to eliminate it cleanly. He rode the elevator down 42 floors and walked across the marble lobby and stood in front of the boy. And the boy looked up. The lobby was full of people. Beck was nearby. 3 other associates stood at measured distances. Chaewon looked at the boy. The boy looked at him. And in that look, direct, flat, utterly without need, Chaewon felt something move in the back of his chest, something he refused to name. He thought of the photograph. He thought of the bone structure. He thought of 23 years of building something that he would one day have to hand to someone, and the specific terror that had lived inside him for the last decade, which was that there was no one worthy of receiving it. Then he looked at this boy's skin, the dark, warm, undeniable darkness of it. And he heard himself speak, low and even, in the voice that silenced boardrooms. "Too dark to be my heir." The words landed in the lobby like stones in still water. Beck looked at the floor. Two secretaries suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people who have heard something they will pretend later that they did not hear. The boy did not flinch. He did not look away. He did not cry or raise his voice or reach for the dignity that had just been publicly stripped from him. He simply looked at Shin Jae-won with those eyes, dark, still, and carrying something ancient and immovable, and said nothing at all. And that was worse. That was so much worse than anything he could have said. Because Shin Jae-won, who had stared down prosecutors and rival bosses and men who had come for him in the dark, stood in his own lobby looking at a 16-year-old boy who refused to break, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that he was the one being assessed. The boy held the gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he reached into his jacket, placed a folded letter on the reception desk, his mother's handwriting. Chae-won would recognize it later, though he did not know that yet. Turned around and walked out of the building. The doors slid closed behind him. Chae-won stood in his lobby. His men stood around him. No one spoke. He looked at the letter on the desk. He did not touch it. He rode the elevator back up to the 42nd floor. He stood at the window and looked at Gangnam spreading out below him. All those lights connected to him. All that power radiating outward from this one point where he stood. And for the first time in 23 years, the view did not make him feel like enough. The letter sat on the reception desk for 4 hours before Chae-won sent someone to bring it up. He did not read it immediately. He placed it on the corner of his desk, that long obsidian surface where contracts were signed and decisions were made that rearranged the lives of people who never knew his name. And he worked through the afternoon as though it were not there. He took 3 calls. He reviewed figures. He approved something that Beck needed approved. He poured a second glass of whiskey at 5 o'clock and stood at the window and watched the light change over the city, that slow bronze bleed of soul at dusk that he had never once stopped to appreciate because appreciation required stillness, and stillness required safety. And safety was something Shin Chae-won had not felt since he was 9 years old. He read the letter at 6:17 in the evening, alone. Imani had not written much. That was like her. He remembered this about her now, how she never used 10 words when 3 would do. How she could sit across from him in a restaurant and say more with silence than most people managed in an hour of talking. The letter was half a page. Her handwriting was steady, the handwriting of a surgeon, of someone whose hands had learned that trembling costs lives. She wrote that she was not asking for anything. She wrote that she had raised Kale alone and intended to continue doing so for as long as she was able, and that if she was not able, she had arrangements in place that did not require his participation. She wrote that she had told the boy the truth when he was old enough to understand it, not a version of it, not a softened translation, but the truth. That his father was a powerful and dangerous man who had chosen not to know him, and that this was his father's loss, not his. She wrote that Kale had decided, on his own, without her encouragement, to go to the building. She had not stopped him because she believed every person had the right to look their own history in the face. And then, at the very end, one sentence that Chae-won read 3 times. "He has your eyes, Chae-won. Not the color. The weight." He folded the letter. He put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest, where he would carry it for the next 11 days without examining why. He told Beck the following morning to locate the boy, to find out where he lived, where he went to school, what his routine looked like. He said this with the flat efficiency of a man assigning surveillance on a business problem. "And if he becomes a liability?" Beck asked, because Beck was thorough. "He is 16 years old," Chaewon said. Beck did not ask again. What the surveillance revealed was not what Chaewon had expected. He was not sure what he had expected. Perhaps dependency, perhaps poverty obvious enough to confirm a narrative he had been quietly constructing, which was that Amani had made choices, and those choices had produced consequences, and those consequences were not his responsibility. What the reports showed instead was a boy who woke at 6 every morning, made his own breakfast, attended school in Mappo with consistent punctuality, and worked 4-hour shifts at a small cafe 3 evenings a week. He paid his own utilities. He had one close friend, a girl who lived in the building next door, and a library card that had been used 14 times in the past 2 months. He had not told anyone about going to the Hukgyong building, not even the girl next door. Chaewon read each report the same way he read financial statements, looking for vulnerability, for leverage, for the thing that would make a situation manageable. He found none. The boy was not struggling in any way that could be fixed with money and thereby controlled. The boy was simply living, with a quietness and self-sufficiency that Chaewon recognized the way you recognize a scar. Not because it is beautiful, but because you know exactly what made it. He sent money anyway. An envelope, unmarked, slipped under the apartment door on a Wednesday night. Enough to cover 2 months of expenses. The envelope was back on his desk by Friday morning, intact, sealed. And inside, a single piece of paper torn from a notebook, 3 words written in the handwriting of someone who had never been taught to soften things. "I don't need it." Chaewon stared at that piece of paper for a long time. Then, without explaining himself to anyone, he got into a car and told the driver to go to Mappo. He found the boy outside the cafe, 40 minutes before his shift started, sitting on a low wall with a book open in his lap. The street was ordinary: a bakery, a pharmacy, a row of parked scooters. No one paid attention to the black car that stopped at the curb, or to the man in the expensive suit who stepped out of it. Kyle looked up when Chaewon approached. He did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, faintly tired, the way someone looks when they have been expecting something unpleasant and are simply relieved it has finally arrived so they can deal with it and move on. Chaewon stopped in front of him. "You sent it back," he said. "Yes," the boy said. "Why?" Ko closed his book. He considered the question with a seriousness that felt disproportionate to his age, and then he answered it with the directness of someone who had decided at some point that social cushioning was a resource he could not afford. "Because I didn't earn it. And because you didn't give it out of kindness. You gave it to make the situation easier for yourself." Taewon said nothing. "That's what you do, isn't it?" Ko continued, without heat, without accusation, just the flat observation of someone stating a fact. "You find the thing that makes a problem quieter. You were hoping I'd take the money and become simpler." The boy was 16. Chaewon had broken men twice his age for less accurate assessments. Instead, he sat down on the wall beside him, not close. 2 feet of distance between them, like a border that neither acknowledged but both respected. Cars passed, someone's music drifted from an upstairs window. "Your mother," Chaewon said after a while. "How is she?" Stable. For now. The treatment. She's handling it. Chaewon nodded. The conversation had the texture of two people speaking across a very large distance, using words as placeholder for everything they did not yet know how to say. He was aware, sitting on that low wall in Mapo in his tailored suit, that he looked absurd. He was aware that he had no framework for this, no precedent, no protocol. Every other relationship in his life had a structure, a hierarchy, a clear line of who owed what to whom. This had none. "I'm not here to give you anything," he said finally. "I don't know why I'm here." Kale looked at him for a moment. That look, direct and still. The weight behind the eyes that Amani had written about. Then he said, very quietly, "Yes, you do." He picked up his book, stood, and went inside the cafe to start his shift. Chaewon sat on the wall alone for another 10 minutes. Then he got back in the car. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He never announced it. He never explained it. He would appear. They would sit in proximity. They would exchange sentences that were never quite about what they were actually about, and then one of them would leave. It was the strangest thing Chaewon had ever done. It was also, though he would have found this observation offensive, the most honest. He told himself it was monitoring, proximity management. He told himself this the same way he had once told himself he did not know about the boy, with great conviction and no sincerity whatsoever. And then, on a Thursday night in late autumn, Beck called. His voice was careful. Careful in the specific way it became when the news was the kind that required delivery rather than message. "There's been an incident," Beck said. "The Jung faction. They've taken someone." Chaewon already knew before the next sentence. He felt it somewhere below thought, in the place where the body knows things before the mind catches up. "They have the boy, sir. They want a meeting." The whiskey glass in Chaewon's hand was very still. "When?" he said. "They gave us until morning." He set the glass down. He stood. And the decision that moved through him in that moment was not strategic, was not calculated, was not filtered through any of the 23 years of cold architecture he had built around himself. It was the oldest decision a human being can make. "Get me the location," he said, "and tell no one else." The Jung faction had chosen a warehouse in Incheon, the kind of place that existed in the gray geography between the port and the industrial estates, where the smell of salt water mixed with machine oil, and nobody asked questions about the sounds that came from inside certain buildings after midnight. Chaewon had been to places like this before. He had been on both sides of what happened in them. He went alone. Not because he was reckless. He was never reckless. But because bringing men meant bringing witnesses. And what he was about to do was something he had not fully articulated even to himself. It lived in the body before it lived in the mind. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. His breathing was even. But somewhere beneath the surface of all that trained stillness, something was moving that had not moved in a very long time. And it was moving fast. He had called no one. He had left no instructions. He had simply taken a car from the building's private garage. Not the usual car, not the one Beck knew, and driven west toward the water with the city falling away behind him and the night pressing down flat and dark over the highway. He thought about the boy sitting on that wall with a book in his lap. He thought about the 3 words on the torn notebook paper. He thought about Amani's letter and the sentence he had carried against his chest for 11 days, like something he did not know how to put down. "He has your eyes, Chaewon." Not the color, the weight. He parked 2 streets from the warehouse and walked the rest. The cold was sharp and specific, the kind of cold that clarifies things. He moved along the edge of the building without sound. This, too, was something the body remembered long after the mind had tried to move on from the years when it had been necessary. He found the side entrance. He found the 2 men outside it. What happened next took less time than it takes to describe. Inside, the warehouse was lit by a single string of industrial bulbs that threw yellow light in pools across concrete floors. Crates stacked high on either side created corridors, a maze that Chaewon read in seconds and moved through without hesitation. He could hear voices ahead. 2 men talking with the relaxed confidence of people who believed they were in control of the evening. He counted 4 of them total by the time he reached the open center of the warehouse. A fold-up table, a portable heater throwing orange light, and in a chair near the far wall, wrists bound behind him, a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled down his cheek and dried there. Shin Kale. The boy was not crying. He was not pleading. He was sitting in that chair the way he sat on the wall outside the cafe, the way he sat in the lobby of the Hukyeong building, with a quality of internal stillness that seemed to be less about bravery and more about a fundamental decision he had made at some point about what he was willing to let show. His eyes were open. When Chaewon stepped into the light, those eyes moved to him immediately, and what was in them was not relief, was not gratitude. It was recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has been waiting and is now simply noting that what they waited for has arrived. The 4 men reacted. What followed was brief and absolute. Chaewon had not stayed at the top of the Hukyeong for 23 years by being a man who managed things from a distance. There were people who believed that power softened a man, gave him distance from the physical, insulated him in delegation. Those people had never met Shin Jae-won. He was at the table because he had always been willing to do what other men sent proxies to do. That had not changed. When it was over, the warehouse was very quiet. Chaewon crossed to where the boy was sitting. He crouched in front of him, an odd thing for a man of his bearing to lower himself, and looked at the cut above the eye. Then he reached into his jacket, found a folded handkerchief, pressed it against the wound with a steadiness born from the same place as everything else he did. The absolute refusal to let his hands reveal what was happening inside him. "Can you stand?" he said. "Yes," Kael said. Chaewon cut the binding at his wrists. The boy stood. He was steady, a little pale beneath the warmth of his skin, but steady. He looked around the warehouse with the flat assessment of someone cataloging information rather than reacting to it. Then he looked at his father. "You came alone," Kael said. "Yes." "Why?" Chaewon straightened. He looked at the boy. This boy who stood in the aftermath of something genuinely frightening and spoke in complete sentences and asked real questions and refused, absolutely refused, to perform any version of himself that was smaller than what he actually was. He thought about how to answer. He thought about the 23 years of architecture, the 42nd floor, the obsidian table, all those lights connected to him. Then he said, with the directness of a man who had run out of simpler options, "Because you have my eyes, and I cannot destroy what is mine." It was not a declaration of love. He did not know how to make one of those. The machinery for it had never been installed. It was something starker and more honest than love. It was recognition. The acknowledgement of a man who had spent decades refusing to see himself clearly, finally standing in a warehouse in Incheon, looking at the only mirror that had ever shown him something true. Kale was quiet for a moment. He pressed the handkerchief against his own eyebrow, taking it over with a self-sufficiency so habitual it seemed involuntary. Then he said, very carefully, "That's not the same as wanting me." "No," Chaewon said. "It is not." Another silence. The heater ticked. Somewhere outside, water moved against the port structures, that low rhythmic sound of the sea doing what it always does, regardless of what men are deciding on its shore. "My mother," Kale said then.
"Does she know you came?" "No." "Will you tell her?"
Chaewon considered this.
"Do you want me to?"
The boy looked at him for a long time. In that look was everything he did not say. 16 years of it, compressed into the space between two people who shared bone structure and blood, and almost nothing else. The anger was there, if you knew how to look for it. But it was not the burning kind. It was the cold kind. The kind that has been managed for so long, it has become structural. Part of the architecture of the person rather than something that still moved freely through them. "I want you to stop pretending," Kale said at last, "that this is about management." Chaewon said nothing. "You didn't come here tonight because I'm a liability."
"You didn't come here because of what it would look like if something happened to me on your watch."
The boy's voice was even, precise. His mother's voice. The voice of someone who had learned to operate on beating hearts in crisis and could not afford imprecision. "You came because you were scared. And I think that might be the first real thing you've ever done." The word scared landed in the warehouse the way the word Heir had landed in the lobby. With weight, with implication, with the specific discomfort of accuracy. Chaewon did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He turned toward the exit and said quietly, "Come." They walked out of the warehouse together into the cold Incheon night, and the door closed behind them on everything that had happened inside. And neither of them spoke again until they reached the car. Chaewon drove. Kale sat in the passenger seat with the handkerchief held to his face and his book bag, impossibly the bag had been with him, they had not taken it, on his lap, and the city rose up ahead of them as they drove back towards Seoul. All those lights, all that complexity, all of it connected to one man who was now driving in silence next to the only person he had ever produced who was not afraid of him. At a red light somewhere in Yeouido, Kale said, without looking at him, "My mother is going to be angry that you came alone." Chaewon almost said something. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved, barely, the ghost of something that in another man, in a different life, might have become a smile. The light changed. He drove. And for the first time in 23 years, Shin Jae-won did not feel entirely like a man moving alone through a world he had conquered. He felt, instead, like something was beginning. He did not know what to do with that, but he did not throw it away. Imani Osei found out 3 ways. First, from the hospital security footage that a nurse mentioned in passing. A tall man in an expensive suit who had sat in the corridor outside her room for 40 minutes on a Friday evening without coming in, and then left without speaking to anyone. Second, from KL, who told her about the warehouse with the same flat precision with which he told her everything, omitting nothing, softening nothing, because she had raised him to understand that the truth was not something you managed for other people's comfort. Third, from Jae-won himself, who appeared at her hospital room door on a Saturday morning with no warning and no flowers and no performance of contrition. Just the man himself, standing in the doorway in a dark coat, looking at her with those eyes that their son had inherited and saying, "I owe you an explanation." Imani looked at him from the bed. She was thinner than he remembered. The illness had taken something from the edges of her, but the center of her was exactly as he had left it 16 years ago. Immovable, clear-eyed, completely unimpressed by him. She had always been the only person in any room who looked at Shin Jae-won and saw exactly what was there rather than what he projected. It had unnerved him then. It unnerved him now. "You owe me considerably more than that," she said. "But sit down." He sat. The chair beside her bed was small and plastic, and absurdly inadequate for a man of his bearing, and he sat in it without complaint. Because there are rooms where power does not travel, and a hospital room where the woman you wronged is recovering from something serious is one of them. They talked for a long time, not warmly. Warmth was not the register available to them. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But honestly. With the specific honesty of two people who have passed the age where pretending serves any useful purpose. He told her what he had seen in the lobby, what had moved in him when the boy refused to break, what had happened in Incheon. She listened without interrupting, which was a discipline he recognized because he practiced it himself. The listening of someone who is collecting information before deciding what to do with it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, Seoul moved in its ordinary Saturday rhythm, indifferent to everything being rearranged in this room. "You said he was too dark," she said. Not as accusation, as fact. The way a surgeon names a complication before deciding how to address it. "Yes." "In front of people who work for you." "Yes." She looked at him. "And now?" Jae-won turned the question over. It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer rather than a constructed one. And he was out of practice with honest answers. They required a different kind of courage than the kind he had spent decades cultivating. Physical courage was simple. You moved toward the thing. Emotional honesty required you to stay still and let the thing move toward you. "Now," he said, "I see that I was afraid, and that I disguised it as contempt because contempt is easier to carry than fear." Imani studied him. Then she said quietly, "He looks exactly like you." "I know." "It terrified you." "Yes." "Because you don't like yourself very much, Jae-won." She said it without cruelty, with the same steadiness she brought to everything. "You never did. And when you saw yourself in him, in a child who had done nothing wrong, who only existed because of choices you both made, you couldn't bear it. So you made it about his skin." The words landed without drama. That was what made them devastating. They arrived quietly, the way true things often do, without needing to announce themselves. He did not defend himself. There was no defense available that he respected enough to offer. "I cannot undo what I said in that lobby," he said. "No, you can't. But I am asking—" He stopped, started again. "I am asking what is possible. Not for my sake, for his." Imani looked at the window for a long moment. The light was pale and thin, the light of a city in late autumn, and it fell across the bed and across her hands, those steady surgeon's hands. And she seemed to be calculating something the way she always calculated, with precision and without sentimentality. "That," she said finally, "is a question you need to ask him, not me." Kale was at the cafe when Jae-won found him. It was a Sunday, the shift ending at noon, and the boy was untying his apron behind the counter when the black car pulled up outside. He looked through the window. He finished untying his apron, folded it, placed it on the counter, and came outside.
They stood on the street. The bakery next door was playing something low and instrumental. A child on a bicycle passed between them and the parked car. "My mother called me," Cale said. "I know. She said you were honest with her." "I tried to be." The boy looked at him with those eyes, and Chaewon no longer experienced that look as unsettling. He had come to understand over these weeks that what lived in those eyes was not emptiness. It was the opposite of emptiness. It was the look of someone who felt everything and had simply learned to feel it somewhere interior and protected, because the exterior world had not historically been a safe place to put it. He recognized this not because he was perceptive, but because he had been doing the same thing for 47 years. "I don't want your organization," Cale said. "I don't want what you built. I'm going to be a doctor, like her." "I know," Chaewon said. And he did know. The library card, the textbooks and the surveillance reports, the quiet, systematic way the boy moved through his life with a destination already fixed in his mind. "I'm not asking you to want any of that." "Then what are you asking?" Chaewon stood on the street in Mappo in his dark coat, in front of the son he had publicly rejected and privately begun to move toward with the slow, terrible difficulty of a man dismantling his own walls with inadequate tools. And he said, "I'm asking if there is anything left. After what I said, after all of it. I'm asking if there is anything that could be built. Not what I imagined, not what I wanted. Whatever is actually possible between us, if anything is." Cale was quiet for a long time. A real silence, not a strategic one. "You humiliated me," he said, "in front of people, because of how I look." "Yes. And you want me to, what, forgive that?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that. I'm asking if you are willing to let something exist between us that isn't defined entirely by the worst thing I've done." The boy looked at the ground, then at the car, then at his father, and something shifted in his face. Not softening exactly, not the collapse of the wall, but the opening of a door within it. A small one. The kind of door that says, not trust, not yet, not easily, but possibility. "I have one condition," Cale said. "Tell me." "You never speak about my appearance again. Not to me, not to your people, not to anyone. What I look like is not a variable in whatever this is. If I'm in that building, if I ever walk through those doors again, I walk through them as your son. All of me. Or none of me." Chaewon looked at him. The dragon on his neck was still. His hands were still. Everything was still. "Agreed," he said, with no hesitation. Because it was not a concession. It was a correction. And he knew the difference. 2 weeks later, Cale walked into the Hook Young building for the second time. He wore the same dark hoodie, the same cargo pants, the same battered sneakers, the backpack on his shoulders. He looked exactly as he had looked the first time, unhurried, unafraid, carrying nothing extra. The lobby was the same marble, the same cold light, the same men at measured distances. Beck was near the elevator. The same secretaries who had found reasons to be elsewhere on that first morning were at their desks. Taewon was waiting near the elevator bank. He did not come forward dramatically. He did not make a speech. He simply stood where he was and watched his son cross the lobby. And when Kyle reached him, he pressed the elevator button, and the doors opened, and they stepped in together. No one spoke.
The doors closed. But every person in that lobby had seen it. Every person who had witnessed the words spoken in this same space weeks ago now witnessed this. And in the Hyukyong, where everything was read, where every signal carried meaning, where the language of power was spoken in gesture and proximity and silence, they understood. On the 42nd floor, the doors opened onto the city. Kale stood at the window for a moment and looked at Seoul. All that light, all that complexity, all those connections radiating outward from this point. He did not look awed. He did not look hungry for it. He looked at it the way a doctor looks at a complicated case, with interest, with assessment, with the clear understanding that this was not his world, but that he was capable of standing in it without being consumed by it. Chae-won stood beside him. 2 feet of distance, the same border as always. Then Kale said, quietly, looking at the city, "She's responding to the treatment. The doctor said the numbers are better." Chae-won exhaled, slowly, the kind of exhale that releases something that has been held for longer than the moment requires. "Good," he said. They stood at the window together in the pale afternoon light, the man who had built an empire on the refusal to be vulnerable, and the boy who had survived abandonment by refusing to be diminished, looking out at the same city from the same height. Different in almost every way that the world had taught them to measure, and identical in the one way that had always mattered most. Below them, Seoul moved on. Indifferent, relentless, beautiful in its complexity. Above it, for the first time, 2 people who shared the same eyes stood in the same room and did not look away from each other. And that, for now, was enough. That was, in fact, everything. If this story moves something inside you, take a moment and reflect. Have you ever been judged? Not for who you are, not for what you've done, not for what you're capable of, but simply for how you look? Have you ever had to stand in a room where someone in power decided your worth before you even opened your mouth? And chosen, like Kale did, not to break? And if you've ever been on the other side, if you've ever let pride or fear or prejudice make you push away the very thing that could have saved you, what did it cost you? And was it too late to go back? Kale never stopped being worthy. He was worthy the whole time. The only thing that changed was his father's willingness to finally see it. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about redemption, dignity, and truth, be sure to subscribe to the channel.